down at a time when many are blaming gender issues for the Democrats' big election defeats last week.
It's one of the ways the Democrats lost me. You know, like puberty blockers. I have 2 kids, you know. I would just be damned for somebody to try to push that upon them.
A New York Times op-ed. It's fascinating. You've got to read it. This was a liberal writer who wrote this, nevertheless, that Democratic voters felt betrayed by the Biden administration. Quote, they resent being labeled anti-trans for questioning whether it's right to simply accept what their children say about their gender.
So as long as I can remember, I have been a Democrat, but this is the first time where I actually decided, you know what, Black Republican all the way, that is what I've become. So a lot of my friends are also becoming Republicans. Some of them don't know they're becoming Republicans, but they just know they voted for a Republican this time. And who is to say they're not going to do that in 2028? And who's to say they're not going to do that moving forward? Now it seems like the Democrats have just been exposed. We were told Trump is a racist. He's a fascist. It's like Hitler. All of a sudden, he wins the election.
Especially since those children often suffer from other mental health issues. Tommy, this writer, Pamela Paul, was fascinating. She goes on to say this, that more than 14,000 American children had gender-related medical interventions between 2019 and 2023. And while much of Europe has been pulling back from gender affirmation model, evidence has emerged that in the U.S., proponents of this approach have let politics color the science. And she goes on to cite a government researcher who had findings that went against gender-affirming care and buried them.
And that study was really important, too, because it was to study the mental health impacts on those that were transitioning. And when it turned out that they didn't have positive mental health impacts 2 years down the road, then she wanted to bury that study that we wasted taxpayer dollars on,
and then the
way.
media who made us believe Kamala Harris was winning in the polls, how can Trump win with such a clean sweep? And you guys were lying to us this entire time. So that just makes the media not trustworthy. And they just lost a lot of credibility when it comes to that, especially CNN. Like, you made us believe Kamala Harris was winning. And then just to find out she got her ass whooped. So that does not look very good. It makes us not trust you, the media company.
This was a liberal writer who wrote this, nevertheless, that Democratic voters felt betrayed by the Biden administration. Quote, they resent being labeled anti-trans for questioning whether it's right to simply accept what their children say about their gender, especially since those children often suffer from other mental health issues. Tommy, this writer, Pamela Paul, was fascinating. She goes on to say this, that more than 14,000 American children had gender-related medical interventions between 2019 and 2023. And while much of Europe has been pulling back from gender affirmation model, evidence has emerged that in the U.S., proponents of this approach have let politics color the science. And she goes on to cite a government researcher who had findings that went against gender-affirming care and buried them.
And that study was really important, too, because it was to study the mental health impacts on those that were transitioning. And when it turned out that they didn't have positive mental health impacts 2 years down the road, then she wanted to bury that study that we wasted taxpayer dollars on, by the way. But I would also argue that there are many in the United States who are figuring out that this social experiment of transitioning your minor children, it's a failed social experiment with lifelong repercussions. If you ever talk to somebody, and I have many times, who's trying to detransition, they'll tell you their life is hell. They are hooked on drugs for the rest of their life because of the surgeries that they've had, because of puberty blockers, because of any type of surgeries they've done to their bodies. They will forever be scarred from this. So I think now the American people, not just Republicans and conservatives, are starting to take a look at this and say, this was a failed social experiment. We want to distance ourselves from this. It doesn't have anything to do with adults choosing to be trans. You can do whatever you want. But when it comes to kids, the line has been drawn. And I think that that's a great step forward.
It is. And, you know, Seth Moulton Harris, he said this, Democrats spend way too much time trying not to offend rather than being brutally honest about the challenge many Americans face. I have 2 little girls. I don't want them getting run over on a playing field by a male or formerly male athlete. But as a Democrat, I'm supposed to be afraid to say that. He got a ton of backlash for that very lucid describing that backlash.
The backlash I've received proves my point that we can't even have these discussions as a party. Instead, we have a wing of our party that shames us, that tries to cancel people who even bring up these difficult topics, and frankly shames voters. This is the same group of people who told us to defund the police, who told us that there wasn't a problem at the southern border, who told us that inflation was transient, whatever that means, and who told us that Biden was just fine. And they're out of touch with voters.
Harris.
Yeah, you know, part of the backlash against Seth Moulton ought to include the fact that he actually voted or did not vote against the Trans Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
Great point. He's got more than a sketchy past on whether or not he really believes what he's saying now. He has an opposite voting record for it. So, I mean, everybody's going to flex now from the left. They want to make sure that they're voting with the right people in silence until it comes time to run again, and then hopefully nobody will remember what they've done in the past.
Their votes are
can't
was,
forget
were,
that.
now, like AOC's pronouns, right? Was, were, now?
Yeah.
Just pass.
Harris
over.
with the receipts on a Friday. I love
well.
that. Ben, to your point, look, the New York Times interviewed several undecided voters, and one who was 25 years old said she became radicalized when she saw that infamous commercial about Kamala's for they, them, I'm for you. And she said, I don't like Trump, but I voted on the side of normalcy.
Yeah.
Because men, we know right from wrong. And you're saying a man cannot tell a woman what to do with her body, right? But a teacher could advise a kid to go castrate himself. It's ridiculous.